All right, so today we will be reviewing, all right, which means that this is like the largest unit, which is why it's really frustrating to me that this whole pre-assessment thing where you guys apparently had the opportunity to get out of work in another class caused a lot of people to sign up for my study session and then not come, which, I mean, hey, doesn't bother me. Can you close that door, bud? Actually, it does bother me because it's... Never mind. I'm gonna keep my mouth shut. So today we review. I would advise you to take notes on like terms, theories, ideas you don't know too well while we do so. Basically, guys, this is a list of all of the terms or theories or ideas that are important to know for this unit for not only this test but the AP exam. All right. So if you're going through and we hit something that you're like, I don't ever remember learning about that, highlight it. That's what you need to go in and review. All right. As far as the review page, okay. Oh, also, if you didn't speak at the Socratic seminar yesterday, not yesterday, Tuesday, you need to make sure to complete the makeup assignment. I sent out Canvas messages regarding this on Tuesday afternoon. This is due tomorrow at midnight. All right. It's a 1.5-page essay. It's not incredibly difficult. You got to make sure you do it. All right. There we go. This is minor grade. So, guys, as far as the review page goes, you've got two Quizlets, a new Quizlet that was made last year that just has the stuff on this. All right, then you have an older Quizlet. The older Quizlet's still good for a lot of the stuff, but it does have some stuff that is no longer on the AP exam for agriculture. So like if you see something on the older Quizlet and you're like, I've never even heard of this before, don't worry about it. Focus on the stuff that is on the new Quizlet as far as like what you want to check out in the older Quizlet. It's just, I'm giving you more resources. All right, KVA students, this list of Unit 5 terms, enduring understandings, and learning objectives is right here. All right, essentially while we're going through this, you should be like highlighting stuff to know what you need to study, right? So maybe you highlight everything you need to study or get more information or read more about in yellow. That'd be a great way to spend your time. Also, as we go through this, all right, essentially I am like listing this review out to where it goes along with enduring understandings, which are big picture ideas, all right? And then learning objectives are basically what the College Board uses to base their multiple choice questions off of. So every multiple choice question deals with a specific learning objective that is listed right here, the majority of them. All right. So what you can do is like if you're like, oh, I got this, I know how to explain the connection between physical geography and agriculture practice, put a check mark. You don't need to study it. If you're like, man, I don't know what the heck rural settlement patterns or methods of surveying rural settlements is, put an X next to it. That's something you need to go look up and investigate tonight when you study. All right. Then we get down to like, here's the link to all of the modules that have information that will be featured on the test. All right. Then you've got all these videos. Some you've already seen, like the Can We Feed 9 Billion People, the food machine. This one, this is Ron Finley. He's awesome. He's an OG. But his whole thing is like his video, his TED Talk he does explains food deserts and urban farming and why urban farming would help deal with food deserts really well. You don't necessarily need to watch the whole thing, but it's an interesting video for sure. Notice he does say some curse words, lots of curse words towards the end. All right, so don't listen to it around grandma. Put some headphones on. All right. As far as like, there's also another video on urban farming that gets into it. This one is by the same guys that are behind the urban farming stuff, but they're looking at like artificial meat and what that could look like or alternatives to meat. Which is interesting. And then there's the granddaddy of all agriculture videos. All right. This is Mr. Sin's full agriculture review. And guys, you might notice it's 1 hour, 58 minutes, and 11 seconds long. All right. Do you need to watch the whole thing? No. But does he cover absolutely everything that could potentially be on the test? Yes. Here's the thing. If you do a good job of noting down what the heck you don't know in today's review, you can then go in and find on this page, because he has this index of all of the times where he talks about stuff at the beginning of the video. You can go in and learn about stuff. All right. So if you're like, man, I don't know what the heck bid rent theory is, go check it out. It's at 35 minutes and 3 seconds in. All right. Or, how does commercial agriculture relate to more developed countries? Go watch it at 1 hour and 7 minutes and 24 seconds in. Or if you just want to learn about the drug trade, go check out 139.33. All right. All very interesting stuff, all stuff that might end up on the AP exam at the end of the year. All right. A lot of this stuff will end up on the test. All right. So go check out the granddaddy of all videos, hop around, find specific things you need to learn or review. All right, guys. Essentially, this is the single largest, unit in the course as far as like what we cover. So it's important to understand it. Guys, we go from like the initial birth of agriculture between 10,000 and 8,000 years ago to modern day. And that's a lot of time. It's a lot of change. So you need to understand a lot of things. All right. That's why it's really important that you get these and you take good notes while we're reviewing today. As far as like what the review is actually over, it's over everything. It's 44 slides long. All right. I'm trying to get through this with you guys today as quickly as possible. We probably won't get through it. I only had one class that actually was quiet enough and listened enough and answered questions quickly enough that I was able to get through it. Guys, if I have to sit up here and ask a question and then wait 30 seconds for y'all to answer, it's going to bog us down. So be quick about it. Okay. So it looks like somebody had a question. All right. Yeah, not a real test though, was it? Wasn't a real test, Julie. It was trying to get out of work. And here's the thing, I already know like 99% of people didn't pass it. So, all right, guys, agriculture review. Let's kick into this. All right, everybody, put your phones away. Just put them in your pocket, put them in your backpack, whatever you need to do to get it out of the way. All right, if you got to charge it, put it in a chair next to you or on the floor. Because here's the thing, you need to be focused for this one. This last year, this was my test that everyone did the worst on. Between finals, everything, any assessment I gave, this was the test that people did the worst on. And it's because you guys don't really understand agriculture that well, because you guys never grew up, like none of you guys grew up on farms. Maybe you guys visited a farm once or twice, but you never spent time on a ranch or a farm or anything. So you guys are very disconnected from this. All right. Once we get into talking about cities and suburbs, right, makes more sense. You guys will understand it better. What's your question, Paulina? Yes, it is just like, I don't think you guys understand how much content I'm trying to cover. And so like, of my 8-hour day at work, I will spend essentially 6 hours just talking through and going through something that I took like essentially 5 weeks to teach y'all. Okay. So it's intense. Got it? All right, let's go. I'm not upset or anything. It's just, I have to be very serious, so I stress this for you guys so that you study. All right. I don't want the majority of my class to fail this test 2 years in a row. Okay. Got it? Yeah. Let's do a good job. All right. So, yeah. Very like upfront, guys. I told y'all to fail. Right? A lot of you guys already failed because you didn't do the project. All right. Let's go. So, availability of resources and cultural practices influence agricultural practices and land use patterns. That's one of those enduring understandings, main idea that's taken throughout a whole bunch of the unit. All right. Essentially, guys, what you got, what you think influences what you do. Makes sense? Yeah. Let's take that into agriculture. So, first up, how are agricultural regions influenced by the natural environment? Essentially, how hot or cold it is, how wet or dry it is, influences what you grow. Make sense? Yes. So, and then, guys, can humans alter the environment to do what they want? Heck yeah, that's what we're really good at. So, right here, paddies, sawas, we have influenced the environment to give us more flat land on which to grow rice. Also, we brought up water to all of these rice paddies to keep the rice safe from birds. Okay? This area, it was nice and hot, but it wasn't wet enough. So you bring in irrigation, you pipe in water, you spray it over the field. Suddenly you got a nice lush field growing, nice amount of crops growing. Oh man, you know what's really great about the tropics? A lot of sun, a lot of rain. Great job. But also the soil's not too great. So you know what you do to it? You chop down some rainforest, you burn it up, you're doing slash and burn agriculture, you're doing shifting cultivation. Suddenly you made the soil better. All right, now you can grow in this field once you tear up all the stumps, right? So then, Is there some downsides to this stuff? Can we actually change things a little bit too much? Sure. Guys, these are two pictures are 6 weeks apart. All right. This is basically a swamp. And you see how many birds and things were living in here, right? This is all this water has creatures living in it that the birds eat. And then they started pumping out water to irrigate some fields, and now it's completely drained. All those creatures gone, all those birds gone. What's happened to the biodiversity of this place? It's gone down, it's dropped. What's happened to the biodiversity of this place? It's gone down, it's dropped, all right? So can we change things too much? Potentially, all right? Keep that in mind. So as far as like the types of cultivation, right? You've got this map to go through and you can kind of learn the main things you really need to know. Shifting cultivation, slash and burn agriculture. That's what you got in a large portion of South America and Sub-Saharan Africa, all right? It's really important to people there who are living subsistence lifestyles. All right. Then East Asia is where you get that intensive wet rice agriculture. There are literally 1 billion people who rely on intensive wet rice agriculture, intensive subsistence, wet rice dominant is the term. All right. That's like East Asia, Southeast Asia, South Asia. You've got millions or billions of people that rely on that for living. All right. You've also got areas of this in East Asia, South Asia, Southeast Asia, where people can't do wet rice intensive. So instead they do non-wet rice dominant, which would be like they're growing grains, they're growing potatoes, they're growing corn, things like that. All right. So you have a mix going on in East, Southeast, and South Asia. And then as far as America goes, you need to know in the Northeast, all right, that's where you have your dairy, all right. And then below that, you have the crop, mixed crop agriculture, all right? And then below that, that's where you get into the truck farming, market gardening stuff, okay? In the center of the country, in the Great Plains, you've got a little bit of that mixed crop, but you also have a lot of grain being grown, all right? You grow grains in the plains. And then once you get into places where it's too dry in America to really grow a lot of crops, that's where you're getting into livestock ranching. Then you have this little area in California and the area around the Mediterranean. What do we call this area around the Mediterranean as far as what kind of crops they grow? What kind of agriculture do they do? What type of agriculture? Do we remember? It's around the Mediterranean Sea, and they happen to name it Mediterranean agriculture, right? Guys, this is where people grow like citrus fruits. This is where people grow olives. This is where people grow a bunch of stuff. This people generally like in Southern Europe and in Northern Africa and things like that. All right. But this particular climate is also, you can find it in California, which is why like the Central Valley is so great for growing. You've got areas of Chile, you've got areas of South Africa. All right. There are places all around the world where you have that nice Mediterranean agriculture happening. All right. Then we're getting into like where are the agricultural region or what are the agricultural regions? They can really be broken down into 4 categories. All right. First category, are they intensive or commercial? Or sorry, not intensive. Sorry, subsistence or commercial. All right, subsistence, who are they feeding? Themselves and their family. Very good. Who's commercial all about feeding? Anybody who can buy their stuff, right? Anybody they can sell to. Okay. So that's the big difference as far as like who is the food being produced for. Then you have intensive or extensive use of land. All right. Basically, are you going for quality of land or quantity of land? All right. Guys, can you have subsistence intensive? Yeah. Can you have subsistence extensive? Yeah. They are not like mutually exclusive in any way, shape, or form. It's think of it like a Punnett square. All right. You can always have that overlap. So what are some examples of intensive farming practices? What are some examples of extensive farming practices? We'll get to that in a bit. All right. We need to talk about rural settlement patterns first. As far as like how people live in rural areas, how people live in the areas where they do agriculture. All right. You got 3 things. You basically got clustered, linear, and dispersed. Which one is dispersed out of these 3? Center, middle, or sorry, left, middle, or right? On the right, all right. Which one is linear? Middle, which one is clustered? All right, left. Very good, very good. So remember, clustered, done for safety. Middle, done for safety and ease of transportation. Dispersed is done because that's kind of how people want to live if they want privacy and things like that. All right. As far as how we divide up the land in rural areas, you got mets and bounds, you got township and range, you got long lots. All right. Meths and bounds. The method of land description involves identifying specific markers or directions and distances. So that would be like, hey, from this boulder to the creek down there in a straight line, and then along the creek, and then up the hill to the oak tree, down to the boulder. That's my area. It's more based on physical descriptions, and you need to know the land really well. So this really only happens in places where people live the longest amount of time. All right. Then you have township and range. This is when Thomas Jefferson was like, man, guys, I might have done a whoopsie daisy and bought half of a continent with the Louisiana Purchase. So let's chop it up and sell it to the American people as soon as possible, because I want everybody to be a small-time farmer spread across the U.S. All right. So what he did is he basically said, hey, how do we chop this up the quickest way possible? Chop it into squares. All right. 20 miles this way, 20 miles this way. That's a plot. 20 miles this way, 20 miles this way, that's a plot. 20 miles this way, 20 miles this way, that's a plot. All right. That's what's going on with township and range. How do you chop up the land the quickest way possible? All right. Does it take into account physical geography at all? No. Did some people end up buying a bunch of dirt and rocks? Yeah. Did some people end up buying some of the most valuable land in the U.S.? Yes. Okay. So it was a mixed bag for people buying things they had never seen. All right. Then you had long lots, and this is when the French came in. They were like, look, we care about transportation and communication. So communication, super easy if all our houses are really close together or along a road or a river. All right. Transportation, really easy if we can get to a road or river from our property. So they made really long, skinny lots so guys, they own plenty of land, but they're still close to their neighbors as far as their houses go, and they're still along a road or river, so they can get their goods in and out really quickly. Nathan, don't fall asleep. You want a mint? I'll get one. You sure? All right. So agriculture that involves greater inputs of capital and paid labor relative to the space being used is intensive agriculture. Think of this as quality over quantity. So you're actually trying to get as much as humanly possible out of the acre you have. So you're going to put a lot of time, effort, money, resources, technology, all the things you can get your hands onto into the land so you can be as productive as possible. All right. First example of this would be market gardening / fruit farming / truck farming. All right. Big areas where this is done, southeastern U.S. All right. It relies on migrant workers, so you're paying labor costs. You got fertilizers, so you're having to pay for that. Machinery, so you're having to buy that. All right. You're putting a lot of money into the soil, but in doing so, you get a lot of apples, asparagus, cherry, lettuce, mushrooms, tomatoes, all those sorts of stuff. Guys, in general, do people pay a lot of money for this? I mean, yeah, right? Like all of this stuff, if you bought a 15-pound bag of apples, that'd be pretty expensive, but a 15-pound bag of rice is pretty cheap, right? So makes you a lot of money if you're getting a lot out of it, okay? Then we have plantation agriculture. This is primarily in the tropics, subtropics, Latin America, Africa, and Asia. Guys, what kind of countries are generally in these areas? More developed or less developed? Less developed countries, all right? Why would they do plantation agriculture in less developed countries? What are they trying to drive down the cost of? Yeah, they're trying to drive down their production costs. You keep the workers' wages as low as possible. So you go to the lowest paying places in the world, less developed countries, and you get the people there to grow your cotton, tobacco, sugarcane, etc. All right. Historically, where are plantations an important form of agriculture in the U.S.? Yeah, in the South, because of slavery, right? If you don't have to pay your workers anything, you just got to keep them alive. All right. Pretty good business practice. Problem is, it definitely led to a lot of people resenting their owners, and eventually led to a civil war. Okay. Also, a lot of white supremacists and stuff like that too. It's still around today, which is the stupidest thing. All right. Then you have mixed crop and livestock. All right. Most distinctive characteristic is the integration of crops and livestock. All right. Essentially, people are both growing crops and raising livestock. All right. And the whole reason why, you feed the crops to the livestock, which makes the livestock more productive. All right. They also poop a lot. So you take that manure and you turn it into fertilizer, which makes your crops more productive. All right. It allows the farmers to evenly distribute the workload throughout the year. If you want to think of it like a bar graph, right? As far as your workload, if you're just growing crops, you're having to do a huge spike of labor at the front to do all the planting, and then you don't do anything while it grows really, and then a huge spike of labor at the end for the harvesting. All right. If you're doing, it does look like Batman's ears. If you're doing integration of crops and livestock, yeah, you have a spike, but because you're growing less crops, is the spike as big? No, it's like half. And then you do a little bit more labor because you got to look after the animals. And then it's even less of a spike on the second one because, guys, some of your animals ate some of your crops along the way. So you're like having to harvest even less towards the end of the year. All right. Basically makes it to where it's a more evenly distributed workload. All right. Where do we see this? In the Northeast, what's the most important crops that are grown? Corn and soybeans. Excuse me. Corn and soybeans are the most important crops in the U.S. mixed commercial farming regions. All right. Stop clicking. So extensive. Okay. Agriculture that use fewer inputs of capital and paid labor relative to the space being used. All right. This is where you care about the quantity of the land, not really the quality. All right. You're just betting on getting as much as you can out of the largest amount of land you can afford. All right. Instead of putting a lot of work, effort, and time into a small amount of land. Okay. Example of this would be shifting cultivation. Guys, shifting cultivation. You go into an area, you chop down a forest, you burn it, you till that ash into the soil. Suddenly you have good grass or good soil, I should say. Okay. But here's the thing. Can they grow on that soil indefinitely? No. Why? Because you run out of the nutrition that you put into the soil. You run out of the nutrients, the minerals, all the things that you put in the soil when you burned all that stuff. All right. So you got your initial field, and then after that field's run out of nutrients, you got to move to a new field, and then 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 a new field. Guys, do you see why it's extensive and not intensive? Anton, stop talking. Paulina, stop talking. You got to focus. All right. You get why it's extensive and not intensive? All right. It's because you have to still use a huge amount of land, even though the amount of land you actually grow on is fairly small. All right. Even though you have that initial thing of like going in, chopping down, burning everything, it's still a small amount of work compared to how much land you're actually working on. Okay. So that's shifting cultivation. Guys, where do we see this most? Tropical, subtropical. Basically, it's those less developed countries, like the countries where they can't afford fertilizer, so they got to do this. All right. Then you've got pastoral nomadism. Okay, this is where you have people who move around with herds of animals in dry regions. Guys, why do they do this in dry regions?
Because it's too hot to grow crops.
Yeah, it's too hot, it's too dry to grow crops. So instead, you just do this. You let animals that already developed here, that already evolved here. Nathan, don't fall asleep. Wake up. You smile under the mask. You're awake. All right. Open your eyes now. Follow along. You're going to fall asleep, and you're not going to do well on this test if you fall asleep during the review. So you got the sheet. Are you sure you don't want an Altoid?
I want a mint.
You want a mint? All right, get a mint. Who else wants a mint? All right. All right. So guys, pastoral nomadism. All right. All right. Pastoral nomadism. Okay, guys, those animals, can they live on that land no matter what? That dry, hot land? Yeah, pretty much. Right? They don't really live for humans, but the whole thing is humans keep them safe from predators, so the animals stay with the humans. Humans then, if it's like sheep and stuff, they shear the wool, they eat the sheep. All right, all that kind of stuff. All right, so the humans get something from it, but do they have to put a lot of work into actually keeping these homies alive? Not really, beyond scaring off a wolf every now and then. Okay, so they can't plant crops, so they raise animals that can live on the land regardless of them. All right, so this is like Bedouins of Saudi Arabia and North Africa, the Maasai of East Africa. All right, huge, not huge herds, but large herds of animals that are protected by nomadic humans. What's nomadic mean, guys? They're constantly moving around. They're never staying in one place. They ain't got no home address. All right. Then you got livestock ranching. Guys, does this kind of look similar to what we just saw with pastoral nomadism? Yeah, but do these cowboys actually have a home address? Yeah, they do. They do. So they're not nomadic. Instead, they move herds around the areas where they're grazing that are around where they live permanently. Okay. So cow and sheep are the most important. All right. Ranching is the commercial grazing of livestock over an extensive area. It's done in dry climates because, guys, just like nomadic pastoralism, right? You can't grow a lot of stuff in these super dry regions, but natural wild grasses can grow, which the cows can eat. All right. But here's the thing, less and less and less people are doing livestock ranching because of the benefits of irrigation. So as irrigation gets cheaper and more available to more and more farmers across the US, you have people changing what they're doing on the land they own from being livestock herding or livestock grazing to actual crop cultivation, all right, which increases the production, increases how much food each acre actually produces. Okay, make sense, y'all? You picking up what I'm putting down? Cool beans. All right. So agriculture has changed over time because of cultural diffusion and advances in technology. Essentially, farming changes because you get new stuff to farm and you get new ways to farm. Make sense? Cool. Why are you this way? All right. Crop hearths and diffusion. What's a hearth, guys?
The place where it started.
The origin point. Very good. And this is talking about the first agricultural revolution. On your page, you'll probably see it as Neolithic revolution. Essentially, this is where people, our dumb ape brains, our dumb primate brains, figured out one potato, two potatoes. All right. We figured out you take one potato, break it in two, you can make two potatoes. All right. And then when you eat that other potato, you can break a piece off and you'll still have a potato. It's very stupid, but we figured it out. All right. Only took us, 200,000 years. So never said humans were smart. So, guys, the places where we figured this out, all right, the herds, the most important places, all right, they're on this map. Guys, do we have any diffusion happening across from Afro-Eurasia to the Americas? No, not yet, all right, not yet. And what were the important places? The Fertile Crescent. That is also known as the Middle East, also known as Southwest Asia, all right? It's like this part of the world is like a wrapper because it's called so many things, all right? But what's important here is wheat, corn, or not, sorry, corn, just wheat, grains is what I meant to say. So you got a bunch of different grains coming out of Southwest Asia, all right? And then you got Latin America. That's where you get corn, but you also get squash, beans. You also get potatoes from South America, all right? Sub-Saharan Africa, they have plenty of things like yam, sorghum, cowpeas. Southeast Asia is where you get the really tasty stuff like mango and coconut, all right? Also, as far as animals go, Southeast Asia is where you get pigs, chickens, things like that. All right, South Asia, right here, the big thing you get out of there is cows. All right, then East Asia, that's where you get rice and ducks. Okay, so you get a bunch of stuff. We didn't have it on here, but horses you get from like Eastern Europe / Central Asia. Okay, so we have the Fertile Crescent, that is Southwest Asia, that is Middle East, aka the Levant, aka the Tigris-Euphrates Valley, whatever you want to call it. All right. Then there's the Indus River Valley. That's out of South Asia, Southeast Asia, Central America. You guys know where those are. So this is when we get that diffusion across the ocean, guys. All right. Who's in charge of this diffusion? He's the worst dude. Christopher Columbus. So you've got him bringing over things like diseases, livestock, honeybees, sugarcane, bananas, citrus. You had a bunch of cool stuff coming over, except for the diseases. All right. And then the stuff from the New World that's going to the Old World would be corn, tomatoes, potatoes, pineapples, tobacco, turkeys, a bunch of cool stuff that really people went nuts for over here. All right. You had in 1492, with Columbus sailing the ocean blue, you really have the first links of a global food network that we still have to this day. All right. And basically, he let the cat out of the bag and there's no coming back. Everything is global now. All right. Then you have the second agricultural revolution. This is the agricultural revolution between 1650 and 1800. All right. This agricultural revolution, we probably covered it the least out of all of them because it's really complicated. There's basically a few things you need to understand. Main thing, we got better technology. We started mass producing like plows, instruments to do farm work with. All right. It allowed that farm work to be easier. So you have people being more productive than ever before. All right. You also have people figuring out like, oh, big pig plus big pig equals big piglet. Once that big piglet grows up, he's a bigger pig than we had before. So if I take the biggest piglet I have and the biggest piglet my farmer neighbor has, and we breed them together, we're going to get an even bigger pig. You do this a couple hundred times and you go from a pig being the size of like 70 to 80 pounds at the max size to being like 500, 600 pounds like we have today. All right. That happens. That starts with the agricultural revolution in the 1600s. All right. You also have crop rotations going on. Basically, we started using our smart human brains instead of our dumb primate brains. We start figuring out science and nutrition and minerals in science and other things. Science. We really love science. All right. This was Europe. They all cared about science. They all said it was their science instead of the fact that they were stealing it from the Islamic scholars of the 7th and 8th century. Either way. All right. So they start figuring out how to grow more and more and more food over time. All right. And then also you do have capitalism coming in, which is important to understand because that's what leads to these things called the acts of enclosure. Guys, way back in the 1500s, who owned all of the land? Starts with a K.
King George.
The king. The king owns all the land. All right. But did you still have the peasants? Could the peasants grow their own food and sustain themselves on his land? Yes, until eventually the king figured out, hey, I like money. All right. And I'm going to sell the thing I have, which is money, because I don't do slavery anymore. I don't do serfdom anymore. So I'm going to sell my land to the rich people around me, which is the merchants who are making money off of the Columbian Exchange. All right. And suddenly you had all these people owning land, and they owned the land the peasants lived on, to where now the peasants had a landlord, to where the landlord said, hey, I get that like you're feeding yourself. That's dope. But also you have to pay me rent. Because they didn't want their food. They could afford to buy their own food, but they wanted more money. All right, because more money they could put into their businesses that was shooting back and forth across the Atlantic in the global trade network they had now set up. So suddenly you have people who are charging people rent to live. Guys, what's going on as far as food production because of, bigger piglets and science and crop rotation and better tools and all that stuff? What's going on? How much food is each person making? It's more than ever before. So suddenly you have people that are like, oh man, I have to pay rent. All right, well, I'll try and make as much food as humanly possible. This is really when we go from like people feeding, themselves and a few other people. All right, people feeding enough people for like 4 or 5 people, shooting up to where now people are feeding like 50 people because they have incentive to really try and produce as much as possible. Because guys, what happens if you don't pay your rent? You get evicted, right? So because these people started buying up all the land that people were already living on, all right, you had, people that were like, oh, I have to produce more food, otherwise I lose my house. All right, it's kind of a messed up system when you think about it. All right, interesting. Then we get into like, guys, we kind of already went into this. The main thing that up here with a seed drill, that's like the piece of technology that really increased the rate at which you can farm. All right, and the productivity of farming, because guys, it used to be, you ever seen like in old shows and stuff, they would like kind of just throw the seed out on the ground. All right, not really great. Seed drill, they figured out you put the seed further in the ground, it's more likely to sprout and actually grow. You use less seeds to farm just as much. All right, very important. Then you had new knowledge and techniques. You had fertilizers, minerals, soil. All right, people figured out how to make farm machinery. They started making the early tractors and stuff in the 1800s. All right, you had the enclosure movement, which led people to be more productive. You also, because everybody's more productive, you need less farmers, so more people can go and, be a shoemaker, be a basket weaver, be all sorts of stuff. Dick don't fall asleep. All right. And then we got the Green Revolution. This is the last agricultural revolution. This is where we got back from World War II, and we were really good at blowing people up with bombs in World War II. We're really good at making bombs. But now, do we need to blow up as many people at the end of World War II? No, the amount of people left to blow up has plummeted to 0 for America. So suddenly you take all the stuff that you used to make bombs, like nitrogen and phosphorus and all sorts of stuff, and instead you make all that stuff into fertilizer. All right. And suddenly what happened to crop yields around the world as we started selling more and more fertilizer to other places? crop yields shoot up. We also figure out how to make even better seed. We figure out how to make even better machinery. We figure out how to use science to make even more food per person, to where nowadays one farmer essentially feeds like 150 people on average around the world. Some farmers feed way more than that. All right. But on average, a farmer in a more developed country right now feeds like over 150 people. Pretty crazy. All right. So because you have this happening, do you have some positives and negatives? Of course. All right. Main positives, we all know all of these great things. All right. Essentially, you've got new food sources, you've got new fertilizer, you've got agriculture outpacing population, which means we proved who wrong?
Thomas Malthus.
Thomas Malthus, right? Because we proved him wrong, we proved who right? What's her name? Esther Boser. Very good. Very proud of you. All right. So scientists continue to invent new food sources. Higher productivity means reduced dependency on imports in places such as China and India. Right. Irrigation is increasing crop yields, and agribusinesses increase the productivity of cash crops, meaning more money is going around in agriculture. You also do have some negatives, though, right? Poorer countries can't afford the machinery. Poorer countries can't afford the fertilizer. Or if they can afford fertilizer, honestly, it's not as good as the fertilizer used in more developed countries. So if it runs into the water, a lot of times it ends up being poisonous. Okay, guys, what happens when you start getting fertilizer in the water? Your fish die, your frogs die, algae grows too quickly, people start getting sick. All right. You also have overfishing. Sub-Saharan populations are still going up, even outpacing their food supply in some places. All right. Irrigation has led to serious groundwater depletion. Essentially, we irrigate too much. We spray too much water out, which is causing our whole aquifer system to dip to critically low levels. And then agribusiness means that land is devoted to raising a single crop. Guys, what happens when you only grow a single crop to biodiversity? It goes down. What's it called when you only grow one crop? Monoculture, monocropping, two terms, exact same thing. Okay. Then getting to kind of the last little bit. All right. Availability of resources and cultural practices influence agricultural practices and land use. Basically, what you got, what you think influences what you do. Make sense? Great. So, guys, subsistence agriculture. Like I said, we're going to come back to it. Right. Production of food primarily for the consumption of the farmer's family. This is still happening in less developed countries and developing countries in the world. Then you've got commercial agriculture. It's happening in those developing countries and those more developing countries. All right. That's where you have the production of food primarily for sale, for money. Okay. Guys, in general, which one's more productive per farmer? Commercial. Commercial farming is always going to be more productive than subsistence farming for a number of reasons. But the three factors that distinguish subsistence from commercial, all right, the main one, percentage of farmers in the labor force. Guys, do you have a higher percentage of farmers or a lower percentage of farmers if you're subsistence? Higher, because here's the thing, everybody's making the food for themselves. There's not much food left over, so you're more likely to need to be a farmer to feed yourself. All right. If you're commercial farming, you probably have lower amounts of farmers in the workforce. So that allows other people to move to cities to do jobs like making shoes or selling shoes or painting shoes or eating shoes, or I don't know. YouTubers are weird. They do a bunch of stuff these days. All right. Then there's the use of machinery. More machinery means more likely to be a commercial farm. Then there's the size of the farm. Larger farm, more likely to be a commercial farm. All right. Remember, percentage of farmers in the labor force and the size of the farm basically equals what density that we learned about in Unit 2? Agricultural density. Yeah, it's all coming together, guys. It's all coming together. Remember, agricultural density, number of farmers divided by the amount of farmland in the country. Okay. Then you can know if it's subsistence or commercial. All right. So we're getting into the commercial agriculture stuff. All right. Basically, large-scale commercial agricultural operations are replacing small family farms. Why? Because small family farms are less efficient, make less money, and get bought up by large agricultural corporations. All right. Also, guys, what's really important? Location, because location is how agricultural agribusinesses really lower their costs to the lowest amount possible. The processing, super close by. Get off your phone, Anton. All right. The markets, they're trying to get as close as possible. Economies of scale, All right. Basically, they can make enough that it drives down their production costs. All right. Transportation, they can control the transportation companies. All right. Government policies, all this stuff is important for what's going on with the global supply chain, because commercial agriculture greatly affects the global supply chain of food now, to where the global supply chain is really only affected by three things anymore. All right. Political relationships. Guys, if two countries are beefing, are they going to sell beef to each other? No. If you don't have the infrastructure to buy my stuff, am I going to bother selling it to you? No. If I already am trading something with you, does it make sense for me to also trade agricultural goods with you? Actually does. It does. Yeah, I caught you with that one. All right. So think about this, right? China sells us a bunch of electronics. It comes over on a big boat. Guys, does it make sense for that boat to go back with nothing from America? No, it doesn't, because it's empty. Why would you make the return trip with nothing on it? Put a bunch of corn on there. Put a bunch of soybeans on there. Send it back. It makes sense. Trust me. All right. So as far as the patterns of world trade, if you are already trading with someone, you generally keep trading with someone. Make sense? All right. All right. So technology support, like all this stuff, all these different things are basically the lines along the commodity chain. You just need to know that agricultural businesses, corporations, how many of these steps do they own? They own basically all of them until they actually get to the people. So they own the company that does the research. They own the company that gets the fish. They own the company that moves the fish. They own the company that cuts up the fish. They own the company that moves the fish again. They don't own the people who are buying it, but they do sell to them. So they own all the sections, right? And then we hit here, the economies of scale. Essentially, you increase your quantity of units you're making, you drive down the price. Why is this? There's a bunch of reasons. Big one is internal size. Essentially, companies are so big that they get discounts from other companies for buying in bulk. All right. Also, large corporations make a lot of money. Large corporations can then spend that money on politicians to be like, hey, here's $100,000 to get yourself reelected because we really like you, but also make sure that we get a subsidy. Sound kind of shady, right? That's politics, baby. All right. Then we have the large shipping companies. Okay. Large shipping companies are owned by the corporations a lot of the time. So the corporations can drive down their transportation costs. All right. So even though their locations might not be perfect, might be far away, you got the lowest possible transportation costs, you're still making profit. That's why corporations can make so much more money than small farms. That's why they're putting small farms out of business. All right. Now we're getting to the theories. These are some of the complicated stuff. One up, bid rent theory. Big idea. The price and demand for land changes as it gets further away from the market. Essentially, if you're right outside the city, your rent is super, super high compared to being really, really, really far away from the city. All right. So you want to, if you're right outside the city, you need to produce the thing that makes you the most money, the most desirable thing. But also, guys, it happens to be that the most desirable thing, you see how its value drops really quickly the further away it is? Because if you get too far away, what happens to your tomatoes before they get to market? They rot, they go bad, you can't sell them. All right. So the bid rent theory is the idea that you have to make the thing that makes you the most money for how far you are away from your market. Okay. Being closer to the market increases the potential for new customers, which is great because that means you're more likely to sell all your stuff before it goes bad. Though there is a trade-off between accessibility, being able to reach all those customers, and the cost of land. Okay. Makes sense, guys? All right. Then you have the von Thunen's model, all right, which the whole thing about von Thunen's model is you emphasize the transportation costs associated with stuff, all right? Explains the contemporary, distribution of agricultural regions. Basically, why we grow the things we do, where we do, is because of transportation costs, all right? Now, von Thunen was basing his off the 1800s in Germany, all right? So he has the urban center, the market, where people buy stuff. That's the town, all right? Then right around it, you have dairy farming, market gardening. Guys, can this stuff go bad pretty quickly? Yeah, so your transportation costs are going to be high because you need to get stuff to places quickly. Also, in general, this stuff harder to move, more expensive to move, transportation costs go up. So you need it close as possible to the market to drive down your transportation costs. All right. Then right around that is forests. Guys, do forests go bad? Does the wood go bad? No, but wood is very heavy. So what's that going to do to transportation costs? Increase them. So that's why forests go after dairy farming, because dairy farming and market gardening, stuff goes bad. You can lose value. It needs to be close by. All right. Forests, Heavy also needs to be close by, doesn't go bad, you can go to put it behind something else. Then you've got grains and field crops. Essentially, grains and field crops, pretty light, all right? Not gonna go bad, time really isn't as much of an issue, so you can move it further out, that's why it's the next ring. The last ring, ranching and livestock. Guys, can meat go bad really quickly? Yes, but can meat go bad really quickly while the animal is still alive? No. So what you do is you raise your ranch, you have your ranch and you raise your livestock really far away, and then you make them walk to their own death. And that saves you a bunch of money. All right, guys, this is why Katy exists. It sounds wild, but Katy exists because we were a stop on a train line that cowboys would bring in cattle from other places across Texas to Katy to be shipped north to Chicago. All right, so ranching and livestock, it's all about transportation costs. Or sorry, not ranching and livestock, von Tuning model, all about transportation costs. Bid rent theory, basically how much it costs to be close to the city, where are you going to be most profitable? All right. Then we have the last bit, which is agricultural production and consumption patterns vary in different locations. Basically, what people do and what people eat changes depending on where you're at. All right. It also presents different issues or challenges as far as environmental, social, economic, cultural, all those things. All right. So guys, the role of the farmer has changed. Basically, farmers have become more and more focused on like the business side these days, to where like capital F farmers are the guys who run a farm, but they're not really getting their hands dirty on the farm that often anymore. All right. You also have environmental consequences. There are plenty. Check this slide out. We're going to run out of time before the end. So check this slide out where you're learning about what's going on with like traditional agriculture and then what happens with modern agriculture. All right. So guys, we got to slide 36. All right. If you want to stay behind and get another 30 minutes of study in, all right, I will be doing a study session starting in 10 minutes. All right. So it might be full. I don't know what'll happen. We'll see. All right. You can also attend over Zoom if you got to catch the bus. See if you can just hop on your phone. So bye guys. Have a great day. Make sure to study. All right. Jameer, don't fall asleep. You're already asleep. All right. So I'm going to pause this recording, KVA, and we'll kick it back in when we come back. All right. So let's do this. I gotta wait for. Okay, cool. There we go. So got the Zoom recording. Let me share my screen. There we go. All right. Okay. Yeah, Leah, for the makeup assignment, I need to go put that in. Just do 12-point font. That's fine. Okay. So agricultural. Let me preface this to everybody on the Zoom or everybody who's watching the recording at home right now. I'm going to finish out from where we were at with the review that I recorded for 7th period. All right. And I'm going to try and finish out the rest of the review we didn't get through the 7th period. And then anybody like last however much time we have at the end, you guys, anybody who's face to face or on the Zoom call, you can just ask me questions. That'll be the end of the review. Okay. So this is the last enduring understanding of the unit. Okay. It's agricultural production and consumption patterns vary in different locations. Basically, what we make, what we eat changes depending on where you're at on the planet, which makes sense, right? And then which then presents us with issues that are like environmental, social, economic, or cultural opportunities and challenges. All right. So like some stuff can be good things, some stuff can be bad things. It kind of just depends on how we respond. All right. So a big thing about this idea is that the role of the farmer has changed. Most farmers today are still subsistence farmers by number, right? But in like more developed countries, the role of the farmer has changed a lot, to where it's more like that guy from Kansas who was growing the corn, and he was saying that he was an input-output manager. So the input was, what fertilizers do I use? What seeds do I use? Who do I hire? Things like that. What farm equipment do I need to replace this year? And then the output is, okay, so where do I send all this corn I've grown? Who do I send it to? Do I send it to the pasta company? Do I send it to McDonald's, right? It's that kind of idea. All right. As far as like, what's this stuff? This is kind of hypothetical questions to kind of get you guys to think about this question at home. All right. Then we have the environmental consequences of agriculture changing. And like as we shift to where more and more of the food production on this planet isn't subsistence, it is moving towards being more and more commercialized, all right, we have some consequences that come up. Okay, some of these consequences deal with like sustainability, all right? Basically, are we able to keep up this commercial production levels for hundreds, if not thousands of years, right? And we've been doing agriculture, mostly subsistence agriculture, for close to 10,000 years in a lot of places, all right? Can we continue doing commercial agriculture for 10,000 years? And all signs kind of point to it being less sustainable and not possible to do that stuff because of these other consequences, like soil degradation, all right? We're pulling so much nutrients out of the soil with how much we grow now, with how big our crops are getting. Our crop yields are so high that we're pulling a lot of nutrients out of the soil. So you have soil degradation. By monocropping, we have a reduction in biodiversity, which changes the entire food chain of the natural world. We have overgrazing happening to where all those places that are doing pastoral nomadism and livestock ranching, you have places where they're eating so much of the natural ground cover, like grasses and shrubs and bushes and things like that, that essentially there's nothing left to keep the soil together. So if a wind comes along, it blows it up. This is the stuff that caused like the Dust Bowl, all right? Then you have river and aquifer depletion. We're using so much water to irrigate that we're running out of water in places. It is causing a huge amount of issues for a lot of the planet. You've got animal waste that is going into these depleted water supplies we have, and they're being tainted further by animal waste, like cow manure and chicken poop being washed into rivers and causing that to kill fish or causing that to kill frogs or really making algae blooms and growths explode, which clogs up those river systems, all right, which is a big problem, all right? Then you also have extensive fertilizer and pesticide use, which is the cause of like those reductions in biodiversity and soil degradations. Because guys, if you've got one fertilizer that works really, really, really well for one crop, and you have that fertilizer, you're probably more likely to monocrop than to do like intertillage or crop rotations or anything like that. All right. Then this is also a really great way to look at environmental impacts. Like we always had environmental impacts. Like traditional agriculture, you got to clear forest to have enough land to grow on. You have soil erosion because guys, in between when you're growing your crop or in between when you harvest your crop and replant your crop, there's a lot of the time of the year where the field is just open, it's just dirt, all right? That leads to some soil erosion. You also have depletion of nutrients if you're growing in the same place over and over and over again. You don't replenish the nutrients, all right? Well, then you have modern agriculture, and obviously it's a lot more extensive issues, okay? So immediately the first cause, you have salinity problem. Basically, you have so much fertilizer into the soil that it makes it to where eventually it gets toxic for plants. All right. Waterlogging, you're pushing so much water into the soil that the soil becomes waterlogged to where it's actually less productive because you're not letting it dry out enough. Pesticides related impacts, which you guys know a lot of those. A big one is the colony collapse disorder. Bees can't survive with some of these pesticides on them. Fertilizer related impacts, where you have like fertilizer causing a bunch of things in addition to that salinity problem, right? Then you have impacts related to high yielding varieties, which like guys, remember that corn thing we talked about when we were learning about monocropping, that like that specific type of corn, which is super high yield and awesome. We got a lot of corn out of it. It got hit with like a specific pathogen, a specific disease, and suddenly our entire corn crop was wiped out in a year. All right, to where now we have to grow more and more and more types of corn. All right. And then also rapid nutrient loss, where essentially if like high yield varieties don't always have as much nutrition as like heritage ones, the types of foods that were grown, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago in some cases. All right. And then you also got, over irrigation, which can lead to desertification, right? You have deforestation happening where you're chopping down forests, wetland destruction where you're destroying wetlands like swamps and stuff, the Everglades, and you have conservation efforts in response to all of these things, trying to save our water systems, trying to save the lands around deserts and things like that. Guys, if you ever see the thing, there's like a thing on Instagram that's been going around for a couple of years now. It gets shared by random pages and stuff, but you'll see people dropping seed bombs which are like these clusters of super nutrient dense soil that have been hardened around a tree seed, and they actually get dropped. And they're trying to do this along the entire edge of the Sahara so they can grow and have more trees along the Sahara to stop the desertification of Africa. Because, which is good. It's fantastic. It's awesome if it works. It's just been doing it for like 10 years. And we don't know how effective it is. You gotta go.
Check out the Zoom because I actually got that.
No problem. It's all good. It's all good. Have a good one. So then we have this one shows water stress, right, guys? So like basically these red areas of the world are where we're running out of water. We're putting a lot of water stress on aquifers, which is the water under the ground, or the river systems, things like that. And you can see, guys, all of California, pretty much all of California is red because we're taxing the water system so much in California. 80% of the fresh water of California goes to the Central Valley to keep our agricultural production high. All right. All of Italy is water taxed right now because they don't have enough fresh water for their population, their agricultural production. All right. India, 1.4 billion people live in this country. Look, half of it has issues with water stress levels to where, huge amount of the people in this country are subsistence farmers, and they're having to deal with potentially not having enough water for their crops or smaller water sources for themselves and their family, right? These are problems that are global, and we don't really have a lot of solutions to these problems right now, all right? As far as societal effects, there's a bunch of societal effects of agricultural practices, right? One is we can have, like, society can influence what food we produce, okay? So these could be examples like organic farming, to where people want to buy more organic stuff, which is great. Or we get a value-added specialty crops where farmers aren't really caring about just making or just producing milk for the farmers market. Instead, they're going to make that milk into cheese or yogurt or something like that, like specialty value-added crops that would add value to the food they take in. All right, and a lot of people like to buy that stuff. So if you've got a lot of fruit trees, you can make that fruit into jam. Instead of just selling the fruit, you take some time, make it into jam. You got some tasty jam. People will buy a lot of it. That really helps your bottom line if you're a farmer. All right. Then you also have fair trade, which is generally pushed by people in more developed countries to try and make sure that the money they spend on things like coffee and chocolate and all sorts of like cash crops, they're actually getting it at a fair price that's fair to the people who grow it, because people understand that like the farmers in less developed countries aren't getting a fair shake. Remember that banana where only 2% of that dollar that the banana cost went to a farmer in a less developed country, right? That shows that that's not really a fair system, considering he's doing so much of the work and he has so much of his time and effort and livelihood invested in these crops that he's getting just the smallest amount from. All right. Then you have local food movements, which is the idea of like, hey, let's start urban farms. Let's buy locally. Let's buy from close by small family farms, things like that, because people understand that one, they're more nutritious, and two, it supports local communities, guys. If you put your money in a local community, it spends more time, it spends more time in your local community, and therefore it helps the economy much more than like, if you go to Taco Bell and buy it. Great, that's fantastic. You have Taco Bell now. I love Taco Bell, but your money is being taken out of Katy, Texas, and being sent to, I think it's California, where Taco Bell has their headquarters. All right. So the big thing about these movements, though, is you have to have a market. You have to have people who are willing to buy these things that usually cost a little bit more, but they understand the benefits behind them. So a lot of it, you have to get some kind of chain that gets your products from point A to point B. So this is like kind of why farmers don't raise deer, elk, and buffalo. There isn't a global demand for them yet, but that's kind of changing. You guys can actually go, and you're much more likely to find deer or venison, elk or buffalo products in the grocery store than I was when I was your age. Right? And that's because the interest in these things, the interest in these alternative meats is actually going up, right? So you might start seeing more and more deer being raised like this in an agricultural setting. All right. As far as the individual food choice movements, this is basically like how does an individual change how they eat to try and make a positive impact in the world? So like, do you support and engage in urban farming? Do you support community-supported agriculture? This is where like a community, like a neighborhood in a city gets together and they actually like kind of raise money for an agricultural project, all right? And they all fund it together and they get some of the produce and some of the profit from this I don't know, venture they have, okay? Then you have organic farming, right? Get all those pesticides, all those fertilizers out of there. Let's get back to basics, okay? You have value-added specialty crops, which you talked about, fair trade, local food movements, dietary shifts. Guys, more and more people are becoming vegan and vegetarian, all right? More and more people are not eating the things that put a lot of the pollution we create as the human species out into the world, right? If you cut down on your red meat, if you cut down on how much poultry you eat, you're essentially putting less pollution into the environment because the food you eat actually produces less pollution overall. All right. And then as far as organic farms go, organic farming is increasing. Why? Because people don't like genetically modified organisms. They don't want to eat things that have been changed in a lab genetically. All right. Basically, like modern biotechnology, the ability to go in and actually change DNA, it's fairly new. All right. It's incredibly new if we think about the entirety of the human species. All right. To go in and actually change DNA with chemicals and things is very interesting. But at the same time, have we been doing genetic modification as far as like what animals we breed, what seeds we raise? Do we mix together two types of apple trees by like rubbing their flowers together? All that stuff. Yeah. It's just kind of the way that we figured out how to increase our yields really early on is big pig plus big pig equals big piglet, right? You get the biggest piglet and it grows into a big pig. You get the next biggest pig you can find and suddenly you've got an even bigger piglet, right? Easy, simple way to understand, but that is genetic modification in a way, all right? But when we're thinking about genetically modified organisms like GMOs, we're really thinking about biotechnology going in, changing it with science, all right? Changing the DNA structure, things like that. All right, and some people don't like that. Some people are freaked out. They're like, I've seen Spider-Man. Spider-Man got bit by a genetically modified spider and he became Spider-Man. All right. So yeah, some people don't like that idea. Then there's agricultural innovations that have resulted in ongoing debates over environmental, cultural, and health impacts. All right. So we talked already. We had our Socratic seminar about GMOs. Should they be the way we focus on? Or should they be the focus for us to feed a world of 9 billion people? All right. Aquaculture is another big one, right? Guys, the population of wild tuna in the world has plummeted over the last 60 years to like incredibly low levels to where if we don't start doing aquaculture where we're actually like raising our own tuna and stuff, eventually, like I wouldn't doubt it that like the generation after y'all's might never actually know what tuna tastes like, which is kind of a crazy thing to think about. All right. As far as GMOs, should they be labeled? Some people believe definitely, right? They want to give information to consumers, which allows them to choose. Most countries other than the US have signed agreements to regulate GMOs. The US really hasn't. US consumers may wish to cut back on their consumption of GMOs until more is learned about them because they are still fairly new technology. But then there's also the other side where they're like, nah, brah. All right, and that's because labelers would unnecessarily spook consumers to where like, oh, if you're worried about GMOs, why were you not worried about animal husbandry, which is also a type of genetic modification? All right. So mandatory labeling would severely disrupt U.S. agriculture, potentially because GMO products are already widespread in the food system. If suddenly everything you ate came stamped with has GMOs in it, yeah, that could like affect a lot of people's bottom lines and affect a lot of employment of people. Right, guys, like I know it wouldn't affect me, but I have no doubt that if people saw on every taco wrapper has genetically modified organisms, people might not eat Taco Bell as much, right? Which would suddenly lead to potentially a lot of people losing their jobs, all right? And the private sector is increasingly labeling GMO-free products, so requiring GMO is unnecessary. This one I don't necessarily agree with because there's also plenty of people who would be like, it doesn't have a not GMO thing, so it must have GMOs. They might just think, well, this is the same product I bought for years. They probably didn't start putting GMOs in it, and they probably could have. All right. So another issue with feeding a global population like we're seeing now is that we have a lack of food access, which is food insecurity, which you guys should know from the seminar, right? The inability to afford or find access to food in countries. There's also food deserts, right? This is what we're seeing in this graph right here, where these are the percentage of people in an area that have no car and no supermarket within a mile. That makes it really, really hard for those people who don't have a car and there's no supermarket within a mile for them to actually get access to nutritious, healthy food. These are like fresh fruits and vegetables, all right? Now, within that mile, they can probably find 10 different places to, eat fast food or get processed food in a gas station or anything like that. But if they can't get to a grocery store to be able to buy just an uncooked potato, all right, they're going to have to buy processed food. If they can't go and buy apples, if they can't go and buy bell peppers, if they can't go and buy spinach, fresh spinach, they're having to buy it from places that it's going to be more expensive to get the good, healthy foods than it would be to buy it at the store. All right. It's also problems with distribution systems, guys. If you don't have the infrastructure or if a country doesn't have the infrastructure to accept food shipments and food products from other countries, right? Like these are areas in less developed parts of the world where they don't have the infrastructure to get food quickly to people who need it. A lot of people could go hungry if suddenly they had a drought or suddenly they had something hit their crops and they couldn't produce as much food. Right? Adverse weather can affect things. Guys, you've seen it over the course of your life. Think about when you were a little kid. How often do you hear about crazy hurricanes hitting the US? All right. Now, think this year. We ran out of names for hurricanes. That has never happened before. All right. We had more hurricanes this year than at any other time in history, or in a single year in history. All right. Like never happened to the US. So adverse weather is getting more and more severe and it could affect those crops, because what happens to a corn crop when suddenly a hurricane comes through, destroys it? You ain't got no corn, right? It's a big deal. All right. Also, land loss to suburbanization. I wish I could move this over a little bit. That's like basically, as cities get bigger and bigger and bigger, as Houston gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, all right, we're losing the small family farms that used to be around cities and things like that. Guys, if you didn't know, we're at Pado High School, right? This entire area north of Katy used to all be family farms that made a bunch of the produce that was eaten by people in Katy. But as Katy keeps expanding and suburbanization keeps happening, we have all these new huge developments going up. People are selling their family farms. That's what's going on north of us, where you used to have all the nice little cows roaming the fields in the morning. All right, that's all getting torn up because of suburbanization, moving the suburbs further and further north of Katy. All right.
We don't really need anymore.
Yeah, right. As far as like land for agriculture, I would say we probably don't need it because we already overproduce in America as far as our food goes. But given the fact that, we have so many pesticides, so many fertilizers on our crops, right? That can make a lot of people unhealthy, right? GMOs can make people with allergies have worse allergies. It's all these things that are kind of tied together into the idea of like, maybe we go to organic farming, which what do you need if you're doing organic farming? You need more and more land, right? Because the produce or the production of organic farming is much less. So I'm going to open up the floor. Does anyone have any specific questions? All right. So, I had a question pop up in chat. Hey, Wilson. What is extensive agriculture? All right. Easiest way to understand extensive versus intensive. Extensive is done over a very large area. All right. You are worried about the quantity of land you have access to. All right. So you need a huge amount of area to make sure you make enough food, you produce enough food to, feed your family or to raise enough money to continue being a farmer if you're doing commercial agriculture. All right. The opposite of extensive is intensive. And that's where like you might not need as much land, but you're putting a lot of time, money, effort, fertilizers, pesticides, resources, machinery use into a smaller piece of land, all right, to try and increase the quality of that land. All right, so you can kind of think of it as quality versus quantity. Extensive, you care about having a lot of land. Intensive, you care about having really, really, really good land, and you're going to make it really good by hell or high water. All right. So, yeah.
So, could you define monoculture?
Monoculture, it's where you're growing one crop. So if let's say you're a farmer and you've got like a 10 by 10 mile field in the middle of Kansas and you're just growing corn, that's a monocrop. All right. Yeah, one disease could wipe out a monocrop farm really easily. One pest like that weevil that chews at the stalks of corn, all right, that could wipe out a cornfield, right? So monocrops, they also not only are like they susceptible to all those things, they're also they reduce the biodiversity of an area. Like if things don't like that monocrop, they're going to be leaving. If they're leaving, that messes up the entire wildlife food chain in the area. All right, makes sense? Okay, cool. Anybody else got any more questions? All right, bid rent theory. Actually, I got a couple. So I'll go in order. All right, terraces. Let me get to this. All right. Okay. So I need to just, we'll do this actually. There you go. And then, so terraces. Let's say you need flat land to grow a crop, all right? But here's the problem. This is what the land around your little house looks like, right? This is your house, okay? And this is what the land around your house looks like, all right? You've got land like this, but you need a lot of flat land. You've really only got flat land right here, okay? Unless you're smart and you do this thing, where you start chopping into this, or you go to the top of the hill and you chop off the top and you make it flat to where now you have flat land up here. And you take all that land that you chopped off and you help build out a little bit to where you've got a little extra land right there. And then you chop out this land right here. Well, now you've got extra land right here. So you're making kind of a stepping stone or a step system where now you're getting more and more flat land. All right, this is what terracing is, okay? So where you've seen this before is if we go all the way back to the second slide, right? Or third slide, I should say, that's terracing, right? They're on the side of a hill, and what they did is they built out the land and made these steps of flat land with which that you can grow more rice. That's what terracing is. You should have read about that a little bit when you were doing your foldable, right? Soil salinization, essentially too much salt in the soil makes it to where you can't grow things. It can happen for numerous reasons. One way it happens, or it used to happen, was ancient armies would salt the earth to of people they had conquered, so that people couldn't grow food in there anymore. You guys ever heard of Carthage? That's what Rome did to Carthage. They burned down the whole city, and then they went to all the fields around the city, and they took salt and they buried all the salt in the ground to make it too salty for anything to grow. Basically, they did a genocide by food. All right, yeah, pretty brutal. The Romans really good at genocide. All right. But nowadays it can happen for numerous reasons. One of which is like if you over fertilize an area, it can lead to soil salinization. All right. Bid rent theory. Let's go back to this down here. All right, where was that? Bid rent theory. There we go. So bid rent theory. The main thing you need to know is that like this axis, right? The y-axis. That's not good. The y-axis equals your rent, all right? All right, your rent. So, or sorry, yeah, rent. How much it costs, okay? So, how much you're paying if you are close to zero, which is going to be in the city, all right? So, how much you pay for rent. But at the same time, right, the distance, what happens to it? It goes down. The rent goes down. This is kind of what happens as far as rent goes, right? It goes like that, okay? But if instead we're thinking of it this way, to where this is how much money you can earn from your crop, that's how you start putting in the different produce you're growing, okay? So, sorry, one second. How economic forces influence agricultural practices. Oh, so like, Aaron, let me explain bid rent theory and then I'll explain that idea in 1 second. All right. Hey, bud, how you doing now? All right, good. Are you going to study for the test tomorrow? All right. So basically the cash, okay, how much you can earn versus the distance from the city. So as you increase the distance, all right, generally everything eventually gets to zero. Because if you're like 1,000 miles away from the city you want to sell your tomatoes in, and you're having to put them on a horse-drawn cart, are you ever going to get those tomatoes to the city before they all rot? So no, eventually the cost of your tomatoes will always hit zero. Same thing with wheat. Same thing with cattle. If you're 3,000 miles away from where you want to be, and you're trying to drive your cattle over 3,000 miles, a lot of them won't make it. And the ones that do, they'll be real skinny by the time they get there. So your worth always eventually goes to zero. Okay. But when you're close to the city, right by the city, that's when your produce can earn the most money. All right. Because you're getting there before your produce rots, before it loses value. All right. You have the most number of people to sell it to. So suddenly you can sell more of it. All right. All of that stuff's happening. So price and demand for land changes as it gets further away because of the bid rent theory. Basically, the further you are away from the city, the less expensive land is. The closer you are to the city or in the city you are, the more expensive the land is. All right. The bid rent theory is all about maximizing your profits. How do you make the most amount of money depending on where you're at, where you're at in the on the distance away from the market. So guys, if you're at number 1, this area right here, what should you be growing? Should you be growing tomatoes, wheat, or cattle? Tomatoes. Why tomatoes? You're closer to the city and your tomatoes are going to make the most amount of money. All right, if you're at 2, what should you be growing? Wheat. Very good. This section right here is where you're at. So you should be growing wheat because wheat's going to get you more money than tomatoes because some of your tomatoes are going to go bad by the time you get into the city if you're this far away. And cattle, you would actually make less money with cattle. So you need to be growing wheat. All right. And finally, if you're after this point right here, all right, you're after that point, you need to be growing cattle because that's the area where, basically all the wheat is going to be less profitable. All the tomatoes are no more profitable at all because they're too far away. They're going bad before they get to the city. All right. So you've got your cattle who walks to the city for you, and then they load them up onto train cars or into the butcher shop, and they get killed and chopped up, and you get a bunch of money because you sold a bunch of cattle. All right. So the reason you want to be closer to the market is you're more likely to make money because you have more customers. All right. This trade-off between accessibility to customers is really what the whole benefit is. All right. And the cost of the land is what the bid rent theory shows. All right. When you are really, really available or really, really accessible to customers, you're going to make the most money for whatever your thing is. But depending on how close you are, how far away you are, some things make you more money than other things. All right. It's not always a perfect one-to-one. You shouldn't always grow tomatoes because sometimes they're going to be so far away that tomatoes aren't as profitable. All right. Makes sense, y'all? Okay. And then Aaron, you asked how economic forces influence agricultural practices. Is this pretty much how farmers have to adapt with urban areas to make money? Yeah, it is. It's also like people deciding to grow cash crops instead of the food, like subsistence food. All right. It's also, farmers deciding, oh, do I grow organic vegetables and get smaller vegetables that I can sell at a little bit higher price? Or do I buy fertilizer and use that fertilizer to get larger vegetables, but I can't charge as much because they're not organic, right? It's all of these economic processes are making sure that what you make is what's best for you, or what each farmer makes is best for them.
Why do they pay so much for organic?
Because people don't like to eat pesticides and fertilizer. Yeah, that's the main thing. Also, generally organic, because organic farms are generally closer to cities, they're also usually a little bit more nutritious. It's not always the case, especially if it's organic done by like a huge corporation. All right, they can still be grown really far away because the corporation can still transport it super far. But like if you get local organic stuff, it's actually more nutritious because it's usually a much shorter time from being like plucked or harvested and put on your plate. Okay. Okay. Anybody got anything else? We went over a little bit of time. We're sitting at like 3:17 right now. I think some people are having to go. That's okay. Anybody got any other questions? Aquaculture is when you raise fish. So you got like a big old, basically a swimming pool full of fish that eat stuff that you give them, and then eventually you put all the fish in a net, and then you chop them up, make them into fish sticks or whatever. All right. Hearth is where something starts. So remember we learned about like cultural hearths. That's where cultural ideas started. Agricultural hearths are where agricultural ideas start. All right. Where something begins. It's the origin point.
Is Neolithic
Neolithic is the first agricultural revolution. I forgot to mention that. Neolithic means like, think like caveman time. Right?
Yeah.
All right, pre-metal tools. All right. Anybody got any other questions? Face-to-face, kids? Are you guys all good? What's up? Yeah. So which is interesting, right? Because like technically, have we been genetically modifying our food since we started like doing animal husbandry and figuring out like, oh, if I take, like we figured out how to genetically modify things by like basically picking which things we want to plant in the ground, right? That is genetic modification. But like GMOs, capital G, capital M, capital O's, that happened after the 60s because it wasn't until that we didn't have advanced science enough right after in the 50s and 60s to start developing GMOs. Yeah, we didn't understand what DNA was really back then. It wasn't until we figured out all that stuff and got like a CRISPR technology, which is like how we actually edit DNA. The same technology that is used to develop like the vaccines against COVID, it's the same technology that's being used to make sure that we get the biggest, prettiest, reddest tomatoes. Yeah, makes sense. Cool. What's up?
What's husbandry?
Animal husbandry is the idea that like big pig plus big pig equals bigger pig. Yeah, like that's animal husbandry. They call it husbandry because husband and wife, they have kids, right? Animal husbandry, animal husband, animal wife has animal kids, right? You're trying to make the best animal kids. Yeah, it's a weird term, for sure. All right, heading out. See you guys. All right. Fertile Crescent. No. Fertile Crescent is just another name for the Middle East. It's the Fertile Crescent specifically talks about the area between the Tigris and the Euphrates Valley, or the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. It's just another area. It's a specific area in the Middle East, specific area in Southwest Asia. It's the same idea. So Fertile Crescent is a place, not a theory or anything.
What's the hardest part of the test that we should like definitely study?
I don't know. It's usually the stuff that like if you miss today, study the stuff you missed today. If you were like, oh, I don't understand what any of this is, like go back and read it. Make sure you actually like. A lot of people didn't do all the readings. A lot of people didn't do like the readings on commodity chains. Like for example, somebody asked what commodity chains were in the chat. Ashlyn, go in and read about, if you go all the way back to modules, one of our homework assignments was all about commodity chains. So you go all the way. Yeah, it was one of the chickens and the pigs and everything. Yeah, the chicken and pig thing. Because guys, if you go back to commodity chains, poultry and pork in the US, all right, this explains the commodity chain of chickens and pigs in America, right? It's all about how the corporations, they own the places where they're growing grains, they own the grains, they own the places where they store the grains, all that stuff. That's what a commodity chain is. Like the commodity chain is the ability for a corporation to own all of the businesses, getting from like actually growing the thing to feeding it to someone. If they own all of the steps along that process, that is the commodity chain. Okay. All right, I think I answered most of the questions. Guys, my throat hurts so bad. I gotta stop talking. I will see all of y'all later. Have a good one. Bye, KBA. Thanks for sticking around. I appreciate it. Bye, guys. I'll put up this video later. All right. Bye, guys. Make sure to study for your test, please.